The wind came low across the plains, dragging the smell of dust and dry grass with it, the kind of wind that made a man pause before finishing his supper. Ely Mercer stood at the narrow window of his farmhouse, one hand resting on the sill, the other curled loosely around a tin cup gone cold. 10 years on this land had taught him to listen. Wind like this carried stories, storms, stampedes, or strangers who didn't want to be seen until they were close enough to matter. Beyond the fence line, the prairie rolled out in long bronze waves, the sun sinking into it like a coin into water. Then he saw them. 3 figures moved out of the haze, not riding, not hiding, simply walking with a calm that felt deliberate. As they drew closer, Eli's breath slowed. They were Apache women, tall, no, massive compared to most people he knew, each step sure and unhurried, their silhouettes cut clean against the dying light. Wide shoulders, long braids swinging against buckskin and woven cloth, beadwork catching the sun in brief flashes. They were unarmed in the obvious sense. No rifles or raised blades, yet there was no mistaking the power in their presence. The land itself seemed to make room for them. Eli stepped onto the porch before they reached the gate. He did not reach for his rifle. He had learned that fear showed itself faster than hostility, and neither served him well. He lifted his hands where they could be seen and waited. The women stopped several paces away, their eyes traveling over the farmhouse, the fields, the fences, and finally him. The tallest stood in the center, her face calm, her gaze direct and measuring, as if she were weighing the worth of the ground beneath his feet. "Farmer," she said at last, her voice steady and low, carrying easily through the wind. "You live alone?" "I do," Eli replied. His voice sounded smaller than he intended, but he did not look away. "You're welcome to water if you need it." Her mouth curved slightly, not quite a smile. "We know," she said. "You share when asked. You do not follow those who leave." Her sisters shifted behind her, one scanning the horizon, the other studying Eli's face with open curiosity. Eli felt the strange sensation of being known without being understood. "You've come a long way," he said. "Night's coming fast." "That is why we are here," the tall woman replied. She took a step closer, her shadow stretching across the dirt. "The night is dangerous. Wolves hunt. Men hunt." She paused, letting the words settle. "You will sleep with us tonight." The sentence landed heavy, not with threat but with certainty. Eli searched her face for mockery or challenge and found none. There was no hunger in her eyes. No cruelty, only expectation, like someone stating the terms of shelter before a storm. He swallowed and nodded once. "Then you'll have a roof and a meal," he said, "and we'll keep watch together." For the first time the woman smiled, brief and approving. She inclined her head, a gesture of agreement rather than gratitude, and motioned to her sisters. They followed Eli through the gate, their strides long, their presence filling the small yard in a way that made the farmhouse seem suddenly fragile. Eli opened the door and stepped aside. They entered without hesitation, respectful but unafraid, as if they had crossed thresholds like this all their lives. Inside, the air held the familiar sense of bread and wood smoke. The women took it in quietly. Eli set about lighting the lamp and stoking the fire, his movements steadying his thoughts. He poured water, tore bread, set what little meat he had on the table. The women sat on the floor near the hearth, their height making even that seem dignified rather than submissive. When he offered the food, they accepted with nods, and for a time the only sounds were chewing and the crackle of fire. As the light deepened, words came easier. One sister spoke of the road behind them, of dust storms and a river crossed at dawn. Another laughed softly at the cramped ceiling, touching a beam with her fingertips as if measuring it against her height. The tall woman watched Eli as he spoke of his fields, of a fence rebuilt 3 times after floods, of the quiet that came after harvest when the land finally rested. She listened as though these things mattered, as though the life of a lone farmer was a story worth carrying. Outside, a howl rose and fell. Eli tensed, instinct flaring, but the women only shifted, alert. "They will not come close," the tall one said. "Not tonight." The fire burned low. Blankets were brought out, spread near the hearth in a loose circle, not crowded, not distant. There was no awkwardness, no embarrassment, only the practical arrangement of bodies against the cold. The tall woman met Eli's eyes again. "This is how we sleep," she said quietly. "Together. Awake to the world." Eli lay back, listening to the wind ease against the walls, the steady breathing around him. He understood then that her words on the porch had never been a claim. They were a promise. In a land that demanded vigilance, trust itself was the rarest shelter. The fire settled into a steady glow. Not roaring now, but breathing. The kind of heat that seeps into bones and makes the night feel less endless. Eli lay on his back with his hat folded beneath his head, eyes tracing the rough beams of the ceiling as shadows swayed across them. The presence of the three women changed the air in the room. He could feel it as surely as the warmth. It was not tension exactly, nor ease, but a focused stillness, like a camp just before dawn when everyone sleeps lightly, listening for the world to speak first. The tallest woman shifted near the hearth, rising onto one elbow to adjust a blanket for one of her sisters. The movement was quiet, deliberate, and Eli noticed how naturally they watched over one another, even in rest. The younger sister murmured something in their language, half dream, half thought, and received a soft answer that settled her again. Outside, the wind scraped along the walls and then moved on, carrying the sound of distant life with it, an owl's call, the scuttle of something small in the grass. Eli closed his eyes and let those sounds layer themselves over the steady rhythm of breathing around him. He had slept alone for so long that the simple fact of shared presence felt strange, almost heavy. Loneliness had a way of thinning a man's sleep. Tonight it pressed him deeper into the earth. He thought of the tall woman's words, awake, to the world, and realized that was exactly how it felt. Not guarded, not afraid, just open. Sometime in the deep of night he stirred. A noise had threaded through his dreams, sharp enough to pull him back. He sat up slowly, careful not to startle anyone. Across the room, the tall woman was already upright, eyes fixed on the door. One of her sisters rose beside her, silent as breath. They did not reach for weapons that were not there. They listened. Eli held still, his pulse loud in his ears. The sound came again, closer now, a scuff against wood, then a low growl. Wolves, perhaps emboldened by hunger, or men who wore it like a second skin. The tall woman lifted her hand, palm down, and, Eli understood without being told. Wait. The third sister slipped to the window, peering out through the narrow gap in the shutter. Moonlight washed her face pale, highlighting the calm focus in her eyes. They test, she whispered. Nothing more. Eli swallowed and nodded. He could feel the land holding its breath with them. After a long moment, the growl faded, replaced by the emptiness that follows danger when it decides to pass you by. The women did not relax immediately. They remained upright, listening, counting heartbeats until the night resumed its ordinary sounds. Only then did the tall woman lower herself back to the blanket. Your walls are thin, she said quietly, not as criticism but observation. They've held so far, Eli replied. She studied him for a moment, then smiled faintly. So have you. Sleep returned slowly, gently. When it did, it was deeper than Eli remembered dreaming in years. He dreamed of wide plains under early light, of walking without urgency, of voices carrying over distance without needing to shout. When dawn came, it did not crash into the room but slipped in through the cracks, pale and cool, brushing faces awake. Eli opened his eyes to morning. The fire was ash now, the air fresh with the promise of heat later in the day. One of the sisters was already up, stretching near the door, her height making the movement look almost ceremonial. Another knelt by the hearth, coaxing flame from embers with practiced ease. The tall woman stood at the window, watching the land as if greeting an old friend. You sleep like stone, one sister said to Eli, amusement in her voice. Must have learned from the ground, he replied, sitting up and rubbing his face. The sound of his own voice in the morning felt oddly intimate. They shared a simple meal, what remained of the bread, a strip of dried meat one of the women produced from her pack. It was not much, but it was enough, and eaten in a way that made it feel complete. When they finished, the tall woman reached into a pouch at her side and drew out a small carving, smooth from handling. It was shaped like a circle broken by a line, simple but deliberate. For your house, she said, placing it in Eli's palm. So the night remembers you are not alone. He closed his fingers around it, surprised by the weight. Thank you, he said, and meant more than the word could carry. They gathered their things without haste. At the door, the tall woman paused and looked back at the room, the blankets, the hearth, the quiet space they had shared. You kept watch, she said. That matters. Eli walked them to the gate. The sun was higher now, turning the fields gold. The women stepped onto the open land, their strides long and sure, the world opening ahead of them. Before they moved on, the tall woman turned once more, If we pass this way again, she said, we will know where the fire is. I'll keep it lit, Eli replied. They nodded and went on, 3 figures moving easily into the vastness. Eli stood there long after they were gone, the token warm in his hand, the farmhouse quiet but changed. The land breathed as it always had, but he understood now that solitude did not have to mean isolation. Sometimes it simply meant waiting for the right people to share the night.